Revolutionary. This word is spoken in the same breath with people, ideas, events, and technology that changed the world. The Revolutionary War doesn't deserve the title of revolutionary because it was simply a revolt against England. It deserves this title because it birthed new ideas, thoughts, and movements that sparked change in countries around the globe. It demonstrated radical principles, such as having a democratic government with shared power. It proved that it was indeed possible to stand up to the might of the British Empire. But there was one idea, an idea that didn't seem like much when it was first proposed, but slowly became one of the building blocks for the United States of America, and remains a subject of much debate in our modern society. This idea began in spirit, when the first pilgrims fled religious persecution and landed on Plymouth Rock. But it began in word, during the American Revolution in 1779, written in the Virginia Statute for Establishing Religious Freedom by Thomas Jefferson. Before the war, the Church of England controlled colonial Virginia, forcing the colonists to attend their services, pay their taxes, and follow their laws. Anyone who didn't subscribe to their beliefs was actively persecuted. Jefferson made the case that the citizens of his home colony of Virginia should be able to choose their faith without coercion and live under a government that separates church and state. The Virginia Statute for Establishing Religious Freedom was a shining symbol of American rebellion in the face of British tyranny. This document is one of the first written examples of religious freedom in the laws of a government. This document has been heralded as one of the most eloquent expressions of religious freedom ever written. This document has been credited with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the meaning of religious freedom, along with our First Amendment right that Congress shall make no law pertaining to a religious establishment, nor the free practice thereof. The Virginia Statute has been the backbone of religious freedom and the separation of church and state since its conception. The ideas that it upholds are more pertinent now than ever before. Because today, we have seen government action and legislation that closely mirrors that same religious persecution that Americans rebelled against all those years ago. Can fear and ignorance make us forget the words written and fought for by our founding fathers during the American Revolution? The ideas of religious tolerance that originated in this great country have spread throughout the world and illuminated the thinking of so many other nations. Did you know that government action against Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, any religious sect, is a violation of international human rights laws? We started that. Thankfully, the US justice system has not forgotten the words written and fought for during the American Revolution. The United States court system has stood as a bulwark against religious intolerance, using the words written and expressed by Thomas Jefferson as a touchstone. The Virginia Statute for Establishing Religious Freedom has done just that for centuries. Established and protected the religious freedom of all of those that live in America. It is my faith in this document, in our government, and in the ideals that they uphold, that allow me to believe that this document will continue to do that same work for many centuries to come.
The time is now near at hand, which must probably determine whether Americans are to be freemen or slaves. George Washington spoke these now famous words to the Continental Army on August 27, 1776, before the Battle of Long Island. At this point, the American Revolution had already been going on for a year, but the war was nowhere close to being over. In most cases, there is one cause and one effect. However, this is not the case regarding the American Revolution, which is also known as the Revolutionary War or the War of Independence. There were several events that led to this war. One of the earliest causes of the American Revolution was the growing opinion that the colonies should be entirely independent from England. Though the actual date of this independence mindset is unknown, one of its prime promoters was Thomas Paine, with his pamphlet Common Sense in 1776. This new idea led to a division in colonial society between those who wanted independence and those who didn't. The names that are now associated with the groups are the Patriots, who wanted freedom, and the Loyalists, who wanted to remain under the Crown's authority. Many accounts have been recorded of violence breaking out in between the two groups. Another factor that led to the Revolutionary War was a confrontation in between colonists and British soldiers. Though there are some major flaws in Paul Revere's account of the incident, there is some truth to it. This much is historically accurate. It occurred in Boston on March 5, 1770, when protesters and other disgruntled colonists began to publicly demonstrate against the presence of British soldiers in the city. The British soldiers who were placed in the city to stop such demonstrations were soon outnumbered by angry colonists. Captain Thomas Preston and his men scuffled with the crowd, but to no avail. Several shots were fired by the soldiers, which led to the deaths of 5 colonists. This event went down in history as the Boston Massacre. Due to the bloodshed that occurred in this act of revolution, it was soon used as an advertisement for American independence. One especially memorable cause of the American Revolution is an event known as the Boston Tea Party. This event was in response to the British Parliament passing the Tea Act in 1773. Britain's purpose for passing this act was to increase the wealth of the British East India Company by reducing the surplus of tea that was held by the company. American merchants were particularly fearful of this action due to its ability to cause them to become bankrupt by an entire British monopoly. The opinion that was held by the American statesmen was soon made apparent when a band of colonists who called themselves the Sons of Liberty, led by Samuel Adams, dressed as Mohawk Indians and raided British merchant ships. They then proceeded in their endeavors and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor. When news of their actions reached Britain, Parliament passed 4 acts in 1774 to punish the colonies for their defiance. And the colonists called these acts the Intolerable Acts. The acts were the Boston Port Act, the Massachusetts Government Act, the Administration of Justice Act, and the Quebec Act. Each one of these financially hurt the colonies, especially the Massachusetts Bay Colony. This led to a long series of disagreements between the colonists and Parliament. Every event that led to the American Revolution was a vital stepping stone for our nation. This war tested the resilience of both the colonists and our founding fathers. Both groups showed that independence was something worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. This was a war, but it was not without cause. And the evidence for this statement is the fact that we are all gathered today in what is now called the United States of America. Unrest led to revolt. Revolt led to revolution. A series of events resulted in our founding fathers adopting the Declaration of the Clauses, a necessity of taking up arms in 1775. This was the turning point in America's existence because now we were the ones declaring action. And to this day, we are considered an independent nation. The American Revolution established that this young nation would replace tyranny with unification. Though there was no one cause of the Revolutionary War, there is one effect: the ability to govern ourselves. There were many brave people that fought for our independence, and now we are the ones that must continue the fight for our rights. And when we think we have done enough, we should say to ourselves what President Ronald Reagan said: freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We didn't pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same.
The American Revolution did not begin in a stuffy Philadelphia hall when 56 delegates signed a piece of paper in 1776. The American Revolution began in a little Massachusetts town called Lexington on April 19, 1775. Massachusetts had been boiling with outrage at the oppressive British taxes and laws passed without any colonial say. Royal Governor Gage, fearing a violent confrontation, dispatched 700 British troops to destroy the arsenal at Concord. On the evening of April 18th, the Americans were alerted to their secret march by Paul Revere's now famous midnight ride. British Lieutenant Colonel Smith would later write in a letter that we found the country had intelligence or strong suspicion of our coming, and fired many signal guns and rung the alarm bells repeatedly. The Americans were ready. The next morning, the British advance guard would find their path blocked by a small but determined line of Minutemen. Though the exact number is disputed, one of them, Sylvanus Wood, testified afterwards that there were only 38 of them. The two forces stood across from each other. British regulars tired from 10 hours of marching, and American Minutemen tired from 10 years of taxation and oppression. The British commander, Major Pitcairn, ordered the rebels 3 times to stand down and let them pass, but the Americans stood their ground. Finally, from an unknown source, a shot rang out. Both sides claimed that the other fired first, but the resulting gunfire and chaos left 2 British soldiers wounded and 8 Minutemen dead. The Americans retreated, and the British advanced, playing fifes and drums. The battle was short and may have seemed inconsequential, but the Minutemen, were the first American revolutionaries. And they were not there for some vague idea of Republican government or democratic elections or colonial representation. They were not the founding fathers, those lawyers and doctors and thinkers who would later build our government, those delegates whom historian James McGregor once called the well-bred, well-fed, well-read, and well-wed. They were simply there because they were done being robbed by unfair taxes, sneered at by quartered troops, ruled by a distant king. They were the people who most acutely felt the pressure and the pain of the British, and they were done rolling over and giving up. The American Revolution would have been nothing without these men. Freedom, equality, and independence were just words. And without guns behind those words and men behind those guns, the American Revolution would have remained just that, words. We focus on the Founding Fathers and forget the Minutemen who became America's first army, fighting not for a king or a paycheck like the British, but for their families, their homes, and their country. There are 3 lessons to draw from these men. First, we must remember the soldier. Then and now, American values and ideas mean nothing without the men willing to fight and die for them. Our soldiers and our veterans are the vanguard of our liberty, and we must never forget their service and their sacrifice. Second, we must always be prepared to serve. Those Minutemen were always prepared. In this 6-minute speech, the Minutemen could have assembled 6 times. They may not have always been well-trained, clothed, or armed, but they were ready to give all they had to their country, and they did. Finally, we must never be afraid to stand against injustice. Before the Founding Fathers had even officially declared independence, those Minutemen were already standing and fighting. They may not have understood the historic implications of their actions, but they knew that they were fighting because they were done giving in. We must do the same. We must stop passively accepting matters when we can stand and change them. I visited Lexington Green 4 months ago, and on that cold, snowy day, it was hard to imagine 2 armies, 2 peoples facing off. But what I had no trouble imagining is the impact of that April skirmish. I see that every day. The whole United States of America, beautiful and spacious, the land of the free because of the brave, exists today because of that first stand against the British on that little Lexington Green.
We live in a world of opinions, and these opinions are like a rubber band. We stand firm in our beliefs and refuse to ease up on the elastic. In our nation's Congress, this can be detrimental, with each side pulling and pulling. Without compromise, it's only a matter of time before the band snaps. We must look back to the Declaration of Independence and the Constitutional Convention to make the connection between how compromise has shaped this country and to today, where we can use that mentality to mend the growing divide between political parties. April 19th, 1775. The first shots had been fired between the American militia and the British. At this point in time, the colonies had not quite reached an agreement as to whether independence was necessary. But by the spring of 1776, the idea of a revolution became increasingly popular amongst the colonies. The Continental Congress arranged for each state to form its own government and assembled a group of 5 men to draft a declaration for the British government. They met, discussed its contents, and removed parts deemed too controversial. Congress approved the final draft of the Declaration on July 4th, 1776. On this day, John Hancock spoke, "We must be unanimous. There must be no pulling different ways. We must hang together." This formal document influenced the unification of the American people. It was a testament to the British that these colonies demanded independence, that they were not just individual sectors, but a singular entity. This was a moment of realization for the colonists. They could not continue to debate the necessity of their independence, but rather band together in order to defeat the British and fight for their freedom. This was the start of the Revolutionary War. After the war had ended and the colonists claimed victory, the Constitutional Convention took place over a span of roughly 100 days in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, from May to September of 1787. With George Washington as the head, the ultimate goal of these meetings was to finalize the distribution of power between the people, the states, and the federal government. Each member had differing opinions on the matter. For instance, the leaders of the Federalists were determined in solidifying a strong central government. Meanwhile, the Anti-Federalists were adamant that state and local governments were the best method of structuring the distribution of power. This was due to their desire for this new country not to resemble the monarchy and aristocracy they had fought so hard to escape from in the Revolutionary War. It was the question of freedom that caused these individuals to struggle with reaching an agreement. How would they define freedom, and how much was too much?
These contrasting perspectives created tension during the drafting of the Articles of Confederation, and by the time these men met for the Constitutional Convention, it was universally known that a compromise was necessary in order to develop a timeless document that would be the foundation of the United States of America. A few other areas of discussion were the representation of states and determining the new branches of government. After many weeks of back and forth, the Constitution had been drafted. Each section was a product of the sheer precaution and time spent negotiating and compromising until a Constitution was created. It took effort, and although the Founding Fathers had several different opinions on what would be best for this new country, as a collective, they pushed through until a general consensus had been formed. In recent years, a common complaint for our Congress is its inability to compromise and make real, effective changes that will better this nation. The divide between Democrats and Republicans is continually growing, and evidence of this is found in a Brookings Institute report that charted the ideological positions of members of Congress. It was revealed that the 112th session was more politically disunited than any other Congress in American history. And this will only continue to worsen unless we look back to the dedication of our founding fathers. Gun laws are an example of the disagreeing nature of the two parties. CBS News reports that over 100 gun control proposals have failed in Congress since 2011. Each denies any action made by the other if it does not fall directly in line with the views of the party. Fortunately, we as people of the United States have not lost the importance of compromise. According to an ABC News poll in 2013, 68% of adults believe that it's more important for a politician to cooperate over party lines than stick with their positions. We know we need to find middle ground, and this hope will be vital in reestablishing a unified front. If we as a nation are able to look back to the unity of the colonists after they declared their independence, or the creation of the Constitution and how powerful compromise had been in its development for wisdom, we can learn how to not only vote based on our personal views, but on a candidate's ability to bridge the gap between the right and the left. Our nation has entered a period of uncertainty, and now more than ever, it is necessary to follow the lead of the members of the Constitutional Convention and Declaration Committee and put in the effort and sacrifice needed for the betterment of our country. Our nation would not be what it is today without the exchanging of opinions and the settling of differences. History has taught us that real change occurs when we shed our pride, ease up on the rubber band, and learn to compromise.
3 loud bangs reverberate on the bolted door. A group of men shatter the lock, bursting in without hesitation. Over the course of 4 frightening hours, the uniformed intruders overturn furniture, break open chests and boxes, and scour private papers, leaving with arms full of confiscated property and a home left in ruins. Sound like a band of thieves? Think again. These men were royal officers of the British King in 1762, ordered to search the home of John Entick, a man whose only crime was writing pamphlets opposing the British government. Our American Revolution was prompted by the domineering and intrusive nature of the British Crown. When our founding fathers penned the Constitution, they were quite familiar with Britain's outright violations of its citizens' privacy. Crafting the Fourth Amendment, our founders sought to ensure that our homes would remain a safe haven. Today, as technology and government power begin to obscure the original intent of the Fourth Amendment, it is more important than ever to explore the history surrounding the amendment and its significance today, as we seek a balance between privacy rights and national security. It is because our founding fathers so valued the privacy of the individual that James Madison proposed the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution during the first U.S. Federal Congress in 1789. The Fourth Amendment protects the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The amendment was adopted as a response to the British government's writs of assistance, which fueled the fire for the Revolutionary War. These general warrants were permanent and granted British officers the legal right to search any lands or homes on the basis of mere suspicion. The Fourth Amendment was meant to change all of that. Over time, however, the Fourth Amendment has been eroded as our government justifies more searching capabilities in the name of homeland security. Following the terror of 9/11, Congress quickly passed the Patriot Act, which allows the government roving surveillance and the ability to delay notification of warrants until after searches are conducted. Edward Snowden's recent disclosures regarding NSA surveillance have raised even more concerns about our government's interpretation of the Fourth Amendment. These NSA programs include the gathering of large swaths of metadata on ordinary Americans, emails, phone calls, and internet activity. Law enforcement officials justify this level of monitoring as a necessity to prevent future terrorism. Are they right? Is it necessary to sacrifice our constitutional protections for the sake of national security? Well, as unlikely as it may seem, our founding fathers crafted the Fourth Amendment so that privacy would help protect, not undermine, our national security. How? Well, the Fourth Amendment, above all else, protects us from losing our republic and our freedoms to a domestic tyrannical government with unchecked free reign to monitor its citizens. We need only look to Pakistan, a nation that has taken its national security efforts to an extreme. Pakistani intelligence agencies have long abused their surveillance powers, shamelessly spying on opposing politicians, Supreme Court judges, journalists, and activists. All of these extensive measures are meant to combat terror attacks by the Taliban. But instead of feeling protected, the Pakistani people live in constant fear of their own government's power. According to one Pakistani journalist, our daily lives are open to unwarranted and unpreventable intrusion. James Madison wisely cautioned Americans against this most egregious form of tyranny when he stated, "The means of defense against foreign danger historically have become instruments of tyranny at home." As we actively fight this war on terror, never before have we seen such a divide between our freedoms and our protection. One way we might ensure that our civil liberties are not compromised further is by allowing more independence to the Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, a watchdog agency tasked with reviewing government activity relating to foreign intelligence. Here in America, it is possible to uphold our Constitution, which our revolutionary ancestors fought and died to secure, while still remaining a protected nation. This pertinent issue requires that we as Americans honor our forefathers' vision for their new nation. For as Ronald Reagan warned, the kind of government that is strong enough to give you everything you need is also strong enough to take away everything that you have.
In the spring of 1782, General George Washington was preparing to commit an act of injustice and barbarity, in the words of the Comte de Rochambeau. Alexander Hamilton wrote, "Every human feeling revolts at Washington's plan," and Washington himself confessed, "I feel myself exceedingly distressed and filled with the keenest anguish." The source of these many unhappy reactions was Washington's determination to execute a British prisoner of war as a response to the execution by loyalists of a Patriot militia officer. The Gill incident, as the affair became known, is little discussed today, but in its facts and resolution, many parallels can be found with the nebulous rules of modern warfare, diplomacy, and politics. Ultimately, the incident provides a case study of the difficult choices national leaders must face when their citizens demand a course of action detrimental to the nation itself. We must therefore consider the background, resolution, and implications of the Hadiya-Gill affair to understand what happened and how this obscure drama is still relevant today. Scandals are rarely as simple as the catchy headlines they make, and this incident is no exception. It all began with Philip White, a loyalist who died under suspicious circumstances while a captive of the New Jersey militia. In retaliation, British Captain Richard Lippincott took American Captain Joshua Huddy from the prison ship in which Huddy was being held and hanged him on the nearby shore. Local citizens quickly sent petitions to General Washington and Congress, hoping for retribution. Washington consulted his generals, who unanimously agreed to execute Captain Lippincott or another British officer. The British refused Washington's request for Lippincott, saying that a British court-martial would administer any necessary justice. Washington was forced to find another British officer, eventually choosing at random 19-year-old Charles Asgill. The nation waited in anticipation for his execution, but there was already substantial opposition from colonial leaders and the international community. This opposition would form the basis of the scandal and lead to the complexity of its resolution. For a variety of reasons, executing Asgill would be detrimental to the nation as a whole, but some method of convincing Congress to ignore their outraged constituents would have to be found in order to change Asgill's fate. Fresh off their victory at the Battle of Yorktown, the American hope for independence was nearing fruition. Negotiations were underway in Paris to end the Revolutionary War, and American diplomats were courting the monarchs of Europe to obtain money and recognition for their new nation. The worst thing that could happen would be for the execution of Asgill to derail peace proceedings and prejudice Europe against America. Europeans viewed the American determination to execute an innocent man as just another sign of the supposed barbarity of the revolutionary government. Eventually, the French foreign minister wrote a personal letter to Washington and Congress, strongly suggesting that the young republic heed the advice of the French government and release Asgill. The letter arrived the day Congress was to vote on the matter, throwing the chamber into chaos. After much debate, the representatives decided that America could not risk losing the support of its most valuable ally. Asgill was released, and guarantees were issued that there would be no further reprisals for the murder of Captain Huddy. In the midst of a war, our nation's founding fathers made an ethically questionable decision to propose executing an innocent man. The British, to be fair, were also at fault, but some commentators then and today have argued that exacting revenge in kind is compounding the initial evil, not doing justice. The question implied then is, should a supposed moral path outweigh what a nation's citizens want or what its leaders desire? This is a highly relevant question today. An Economist article from 2014 puts it best, stating, American politicians debate whether to accord captured terrorists the same rights as other criminals, or whether the exigencies of unconventional warfare necessitate some relaxation of the rules of engagement. And a New York Times article from 1991 likened the Asgill affair to hostage crises in the Middle East, with particular focus on the fact that taking prisoners for political purposes is a technique that has long been used by new governments looking to show their power and appease revolutionary crowds. However, the most practical lesson that can be learned from the Hadiya-Gill incident is that a full consideration of all available facts and sources of information yields the best result. As modern world leaders confront challenges, they must remember that impulsive or unilateral action often has highly detrimental consequences. It was fortunate that America had the steady presence of George Washington and his fellow leaders to guide our nation through one of its first international scandals. The Hadiya-Gill affair falls into an often forgotten period in the Revolutionary War, between the Battle of Yorktown and the signing of the Treaty of Paris. Considered superficially, the incident seems to bear little relevance to either event. To the leaders of the day, though, it was a key step between fratricidal war and a stable peace. A major crisis was averted as our nation made good on its founding premise to defy autocratic abuses and obey the rule of law. Washington would later write, he felt a singular pleasure in being able to release Asgill, firm in the knowledge that he had fulfilled his sense of duty.